Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin With ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. And with me tonight, we have Remy from Bahama Llama Coral. Remy, man, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I was honored when you asked.
No, listen, I'm a big fan of yours in terms of what you're doing on YouTube and Instagram. So, I think we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. I want to just welcome everybody that's tuning in so far. I see Algae Warrior, John the Reefer Vermont, Reef the Sea Forever, Star City Reef. Who else we got? Great Bearded Reef. What's up there, Paul? So Colin Garvey maybe. I'm sorry there, Colin, if I mispronounce you. Hey, Greg, what's up, man? Thanks for tuning in, everybody. So, as we usually do, we have a conversation between myself and the guest, but I completely encourage comments and questions in the live chat. It just makes it a little bit more interactive and immersive. So certainly get involved in the conversation here. Hey, Brian, what's up? I'm saying hey there, Remy. So
what up, Brian?
So you got some peeps there, I think, that are following you from your channel, right?
Yeah, I think so. I say a lot of familiar, I say faces, but a lot of familiar screen names that comment on the videos. So thank you guys all for showing up tonight. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, for sure. So Remy, I always kind of start off the show by asking my guests how they got into the hobby. So let's kick it off there in terms of how you got started in reef keeping.
How many of your guests also say freshwater to start? I have always been fascinated by animal. Yeah, right. I've always been fascinated by animals and by keeping animals in the house. I remember setting up an elaborate squirrel trap, which was devised of throwing a rope over we had a giant willow tree at my parents' house when I was growing up, and I threw a giant rope over, tied a basket to the end of the rope, and the end of the rope went into the bathroom where I sat there waiting for a squirrel. So I've always loved animals. I've had leopard geckos, cockatiels. I've had parakeets. My room in high school and junior high was a veritable zoo. It was weird whenever you'd have friends over and they're just like nonstop noise from the birds and stuff. But yeah, I started in freshwater. Cichlids really were fascinating to me because I feel like aside from discus, it's probably one of the more colorful fishes that you can get into when you're in freshwater. And little did I know that $7 or $8 for a fish was going to be cheap in comparison to the saltwater hobby.
Yeah. That's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, when I hear freshwater people say, I dropped $20 on a fish, I'm like, okay, that's about the average price of like a clownfish or something like that. But yeah, so I started in junior high school keeping animals, and I think it was college I switched over to saltwater fish only tanks, just had some pretty basic fish, and then it wasn't until about 6 years ago where I finally got a job that would allow me to venture into the world of reef keeping, and I've never looked back. It's just been pretty awesome. The community is awesome. I love sharing my experience with everyone on the YouTube channel, and I think my entry into reef keeping is probably pretty typical for most people. You kind of like gradually go up. I don't know if there's a lot of people that just go right into reef keeping right off the bat. You're usually trickling in via some other area in aquatics. So that's my story.
Yeah, my addiction started with a 2-gallon freshwater tank that housed a Siamese fighting fish. And the reason why that happened is I had always been exposed to fish tanks when I was growing up. My father had fish only, saltwater tanks. So, I think there were 125-gallon tanks is what he kept. And I always used to tag along to local fish stores with him. So I sort of had that kind of like in me. But when I started working in New York City, my wife and I were living in an apartment, and we went, I don't know if this was before we got married. I guess this was before we got married, while we were like dating maybe. And we went to what was called the San Gennaro Festival. It's a big famous street festival fair, what have you, down in Little Italy. in Manhattan. So they have these games where you can, pay $5 or whatever like that, and throw darts at a target. Or so they had this one game with a whole bunch of fish bowls with goldfish. I guess it was a goldfish that I had, and these little fish bowls with goldfish. And I mean, you throw a ping pong ball at all the like 100 goldfish bowls, and if your ping pong ball ends up in one of these goldfish bowls, you win the fish. Well, I won the fish, so I I went the next morning. I went out and I got a little 2-gallon tank to house this goldfish. Maybe I got a Siamese fighting fish later. The goldfish I don't think lasted too long, but then for me it graduated to like a 29-gallon freshwater planted tank, then a reef tank. So yeah, I think that is a normal progression in terms of fresh to salt.
Yeah, I feel like now that you mention it, my first fish was definitely from the fair, and it was definitely from that game, where you're throwing and you're paying $16 for a 9-cent feeder fish or whatever that they've got in those games. And I named him Radish, and he died because I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I wanted to hug it, and it just
that's not advisable.
Didn't work
right?
out. Not advisable.
So Remy, talk about you mentioned the YouTube channel, and it's a very popular channel. You've got about 12,000 YouTube subscribers on there, and I think on Instagram you're like around 5,000 or north of 5,000 followers on Instagram. So you got a really good following, but you kind of have experience, right, in terms of this communication stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. I cheated just a tiny little smidge in that. I was just thinking about this. I feel like I almost live in two different worlds. Like I have this radio career that I've been in radio for 20 years or so, if you include the late nights at the college radio station where I was, broadcasting to nobody. If you include those, yeah, about 20 years in radio. So kind of progressed up my way in the radio world. My partner and I to St. Louis back in 2010. And we got promoted to start a station up in Chicago. So we went up there for 3 years. And then the company that we worked for, as we're seeing right now a lot, especially in the radio industry and broadcast in general, but a lot of people can't keep up with the no advertising thing with COVID and all that. So they ended up going bankrupt and like letting go 90% of the staff. So we ended up back in St. Louis, which is kind of a blessing because I don't know if anybody from Chicago is watching that works downtown in Chicago, but it was $315 a month to park at my job. Yeah. So yeah, very, very, I'm very thankful for my free spot every day at my job now. But yeah, we're super happy in St. Louis, but I've got that job. And so being in front of people or, talking to people, live streaming like this, being live, hasn't really ever bothered me too much. So I've got a one-up on that. And then right out of college, I worked at State Farm in creative services. So we were basically like an in-house advertising agency for the company. So we traveled all over the country and shot the most boring videos in the world with State Farm agents. And every once in a while we get a cool one. So I think it was like 2009 when the All-Star game was in New York City and State Farm sponsored the Home Run Derby. And so we got to go and like be on Times Square, and Cal Ripken Jr. was like giving a lesson to these kids on a batting cage that they had set up on Times Square. And like David Ortiz is walking around. And as a former baseball player myself, like, wow, like seeing these legends just like walking around like no big deal. So that was kind of cool. But through that job, I gained a lot of experience with video and photography and learning from some really, really, really talented people that, had worked in Hollywood or worked in Chicago or New York or whatever, and just wanted to settle down in Central Illinois and still do what they loved, but, also have some security because as many people know, Hollywood and, production and that kind of thing, it's volatile, especially last year. I mean, you saw that. I mean, last year was a prime example of how volatile it can be. And so did that for a little bit. And yeah, I think all of that kind of lends itself into some of the skills that I use for the YouTube channel, on a weekly basis now, having the camera knowledge, having the lighting knowledge, that kind of stuff. It pushes me a little bit ahead. So I kind of have an edge that way. But I think as far as the YouTube channel goes from an experience thing, it's just great to be in the community and just putting it out there for everybody. Like Keith, you've been in this forever. Like, you're an OG. You've been here forever. I'm very new in comparison to that, but still
You're
can have an
you're talking
audience.
about the hobby, not on YouTube.
Yeah, the hobby. Yeah, I mean, you've got so much experience in this, but here we are, you and I, talking in a sense of community, and that's what I love so much about it. Is at the end of the day, my mission for the YouTube channel, and I'm not sure if a lot of people have this, is just to empower hobbyists to try new things. Like, there's so many different facets of this, of reef keeping. There's, the macro algae tank. There's breeding clownfish. There's culturing rotifers. There's all these things that I like doing. I've been vending at frag swaps here locally, like all very stressful stuff to start. But once you've got that down, like, now you can move on and try something else. See what else you like about this hobby, because there's just so much to explore. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it did, and then some. So Greg Carroll is asking, he's got to know, did you know Jake from State Farm?
That campaign started like after I was gone, and unfortunately, Greg, we got all the crappy jobs. Like, it was so, like, I think this is probably like this in every corporate atmosphere, where like you have your in-house staff that does stuff, but then they hired out advertising agencies in Chicago and New York to do all the cool stuff, like all the Jake from State Farm stuff, or all the funny commercials that needed like real actors. We basically I would parallel us to like a documentary kind of feel. Like, we would tell stories that were, shown internally. Every once in a while, I'll get a message from someone that just starts at State Farm that knows me because I'm on a lot of the training videos still. I'm the bad guy. I'm like the guy that's breaking all the HR rules. That was more of my job.
Is that how you got cast as bad guy, huh?
Yeah. Well, we got to do it with like $100,000 cameras, so it was still fun.
Well, I'll tell you, man, you and I have some more things in common. You mentioned that you kind of started the college radio station. That's how I started my communications career in college radio. I produced a sports show that we broadcast every Sunday evening on the radio. I think sometimes I was on the sports show hosting, but typically I was behind the scenes. And then I spent 26 years in the advertising business. So, I know what you're talking about. I worked on the ad agency side. Then I worked for CNN and Turner Broadcasting for about 21 years. And I was working on the advertising research side of the fence. So I had no experience whatsoever in terms of video production when I started doing this YouTube channel. So I just really came out cold turkey and just, again, watch some of the content creators in this community to see what was being put out there, and my focus on the channel was to try to really relate my experiences as I was kind of making this journey through the hobby. Obviously I had a lot of years of experience, so I was trying to focus on that, but also to just kind of chronicle the daily life of a reef keeper. And I think your channel, you do a great job, man. I really enjoy your content. It's really it's easy to understand. It's entertaining, but I think it's also informative, which is great.
Likewise, yeah. I think getting into YouTube on the reefing side, you kind of do your research, like you said, and you had come up several times, and I was like, okay, this guy's video production's pretty good. I like it. It's easy to follow, like you said, and it's pleasing to the eye. And I think as I'm doing this clownfish breeding, I'm going down this path. And hey, if you guys would like, spawn, that'd be great. Okay. You can't rush this. You can't. But
how long have you been trying?
Well, it's funny because I was doing some maintenance in the tank probably 2 months ago now, and I noticed that they had spawned on one of the frag plugs, and I pulled it out, and I was like, what's this? Some kind of sponge or something? No, it was just a bunch of eggs, and I put it back in, and they immediately just protected it. And so I was like, oh, man, they're spawning. This happens every 2 weeks, right now? Yeah, okay. No. I introduced this clay pot, and I think they've just been adjusting again. So
Like, what the hell is that?
um, yeah. So I've in going back to like video production, there's a lot of videos on YouTube about spawning having clownfish breed, but it's so hard to follow a lot of these videos. And I think that my job, or what I would like to do, is distill it down as much as I possibly can for someone that is interested in doing something like that, but giving them a more basic roadmap, a recipe, if you will, to doing that. Because just getting into it, I mean, I had looked into it before. I know you had to have like, live rotifers and things like that ready to go, and green water and all this stuff, but it's overwhelming. And I think when your clownfish start to breed, the first thing you want to do as a hobbyist, I think most of us, is like, I want to raise you. Like, I want to bring you up because this is cool, right? So that's kind of my goal, is to distill the information as much as I can for people, and not necessarily to be a how-to video, because that can get a little dicey when you say how to, because there's 500 how-tos for the same thing. You know what I mean? And then their comment section blows up with, well, did you try this? Did you try this? You're not doing this. Did you try this? That's, all that kind of stuff. So I usually say, instead of how to, how I, and that seems to calm the waters a little bit.
So a couple of comments here. Scotty Damron, Remy has given me the courage to want to make YouTube videos, so hopefully soon I'll make my mark, thanks to Remy. And Great Bearded Reef is saying that my clowns just spawned on top of a large mushroom and blue hornet rock. Gonna be a grandfather, laugh out loud. I tell you, I had a bizarre experience with the clownfish in my 187 gallon tank. They were not a bonded pair. I had a pair and I lost one of them, so I added a new one, and they didn't really bond whatsoever. I mean, they were essentially sleeping in different corners of the tank. Over the years, I've always had clownfish host like LPS, like a leather coral or a hammer coral or a torch or something, and these clownfish did not want to host anything. And I got a decent amount of LPS in the tank, and they just did not want to host anything. So eventually, one of them did actually start hosting one of my Alveopora, which is really cool. But the other one was like, yeah, well, I'm just going to kind of stick to the corner of the tank. But one day, after about a year, I look into into the tank, and they're both hanging out in one of the bottom corners of the tank, and they're protecting a clutch of eggs. I'm like, holy mackerel, these things are breeding? You got to be kidding me. And eventually, I guess they started liking one another and hanging out. So you never know.
Yeah, that's cool. That's another part of the hobby I just love. It's just it's different every day. There's something new. There's something that changes in your tank every day, and I love that.
Reef the Sea, my clowns host an SPS. Wow, I've never heard of that. That's pretty. That's
like
pretty
a furry, like Millie or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. So dude, what's up with the name Bahama Llama Coral? What's the history behind that?
It's funny. I wish there was like an awesome story behind it, but there really isn't. So the whole idea of me sharing anything about my tank just came from the fact that I have like my own personal Instagram account. And every once in a while I would post, oh, I got these zoanthids, or, this cool mushroom. And, you get a couple hundred likes on a photo of your kids, but then you put a coral on there, it's like 25 people like this. So I was like, okay, I need to move this elsewhere. It needs to go somewhere where it can, have a community surrounding it or whatever. So we were at Disney World I think it was like, I don't know when the Instagram channel started. I think it was like maybe 17 or 18. And, the endless lines that you're waiting in at Disney for any ride. And I just started like playing with names and alliteration and rhyming and all that kind of thing. And I think one of them was pure polyps. And I was like, that sounds like a colonoscopy, like Instagram. It was going to be mainly zoanthids, but then I was like, Bahama Llama. I know that there's like a Bahama Llama t-shirt line or some sort of like soccer mom line. I don't know. But there's no Bahama Llama Coral. And I just felt like the juxtaposition of a land mammal and the sea is just kind of this cool fascination, because we are all land mammals who are fascinated with the sea. It goes a little bit deeper than you might think, but yeah, it's and had Comiquarium. Everybody always asks me who designed the original llama logo, and there's a guy, and I think he's in Indonesia or the Philippines. I forget where he's at, but he agreed to do a logo for me, and that's where the llama was born. And I was like, this thing might be the cutest llama of all time. And I was so excited about it. And yeah, it's been through a couple iterations now, and Super Llama just came out. I don't know if you saw that, but
I did. I want one of those stickers.
he is here to save. He will save your reef tank.
It's got so the llama's got a cape now.
Yes, yes. So Lazy Mondays, who's a graphic designer who's also a part of the reefing community, has designed a lot of reefers logos, came up with that, and I thought it was great. So, but yeah, that's kind of where the name stemmed from, Disney World line, when my mind was free and, you know, in the happiest place on earth.
Yeah, you know, you just kind of like gotta let the thoughts start flowing somehow. So Greg Carroll is saying, hey, everybody hit that like button. More people will see this. Yeah. Let's encourage hitting that like button.
No, I'm gonna go like it.
Yeah,
okay. Just like that.
Please like it, everybody that's watching right now. So in terms of the channel, you know, you put out a lot of videos. What and I know the answer to this for myself, but what video have you put out has gotten the biggest blowback? Like the most negative response, or have you gotten a video that's just really kind of, you know, been a thud?
Yeah, I think it's weird because
and I'm not asking you to like point out your shittiest work here, but
well, I think it's an early video. It is, I think it is not sure of the title. You could probably, if you just search $900 zoanthids. I had won a raffle from Golden Basket. I won like randomly, never win raffles ever in my lifetime. Won some Little Shop of Horror zoanthids, and they are just some of my favorite zoanthids of all time. They're green and purple and red and yellow. There's just so many great colors in them. And I was like, I'm going to do an unboxing. This is early on in the YouTube channel. And I think it did really well. It actually, from a view standpoint, did really well because I think it was the title. Well, when you start putting dollar figures on coral and names on coral and all of that stuff, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily like that. And so that's probably my most disliked video while having a lot of views, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like, I would say it wasn't a dud necessarily, but it got a bunch of, I would say, blowback from the community. Probably the most trolls showed up on that video.
I did a video about the dangers of using a do-it-yourself algae reactor. You know, and full disclosure, I sell Pax Bellum ARID algae reactors, and you know, so one of the videos I put out, I did a video about how it can be dangerous to use a do-it-yourself algae reactor if you're wrapping an LED strip light around an acrylic container. You know, and I thought, you know, and I still believe it's dangerous when you're playing with electricity like that. But there was some hardcore do-it-yourselfers out there that I guess had made their algae reactors that did not like that video. And I got some serious blowback on that video. But you know, hey, it's a you know, you're putting out information, and not everybody is going to agree with you, and it's tough. I mean, sometimes even on popular videos, you know, there are some pretty harsh criticisms. So as a content creator, you got to be able to kind of take the criticism, and I always try to respond in a fair and honest way to any criticism. But you know, it can get a little gnarly sometimes.
Yeah. I just I truly wish that we could all be constructive, and just, you know, the criticism or whatever is for positive, and it's text, so that you can't always it's hard to get tone through text a lot of times. So maybe someone's trying to help out, but it just looks like that you're taking offense to it or whatever. But I'm almost afraid and I'm sure that a couple of your videos have gone, I don't know, quote viral or whatever. You've had more views on them more than any other. I'm almost afraid of that happening because when the algorithm takes your video out to the mainstream, you end up with all these people that are outside of the community that may just troll the troll. So that's kind of what I like about having just a condensed, population of reefers and hobbyists, is that we can actually have a good conversation in the comment section and help solve problems and things like that. So
Yep.
I'm a little afraid of that happening, but you never know. You never know what the algorithm is going to pick up this week. You don't know if it picked up some search term that everybody's searching this week. I think there was a guy, I forget what the channel is, but this guy is a mechanic, and his whole channel is about just what you do at an auto shop. And he has a reef tank in his auto shop, and he did a video on it one day, and it had like 600,000 views in 48 hours. And so now he's doing nothing but reef tank videos, and it's very funny how people will skew their content to what the numbers say. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you, my most popular video, one of my most popular videos was a do-it-yourself video in terms of how to remove glued PVC pipe from a fitting. So, and I did a video using a propane torch in terms of heating up a hole saw that I stuck into the PVC pipe that melted it and allowed you to pull a piece that, essentially I screwed up and glued a piece of pipe into a bulkhead or whatever it was, a valve. And it slides right out. So that was like one of my most popular videos. And for you, what would you say has been, some of your more popular videos?
Well, if we're going on like search terms and stuff, I feel like the most popular videos, for whatever reason, for me, are anything that has to do with zoanthids.
Oh yeah,
like fragging zoanthids, or Zoanthid Garden is probably another one that's been super popular. I'm going to my actual page right now to see. My most popular video is high-end Zoa Garden.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then and my buddy Ben, who lives here in St. Louis, I had a reef tank tour that he did, that I did with him, where he had lit this 120 gallon with $100 lights he found on Amazon.
Oh right, I saw that video. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of my more popular videos. He's up there a couple times with the 100% Euphilia tank tour. I don't really have my highest video is 34,000. I wouldn't consider that like crazy popular, but at the same time,
That's pretty.
I think
pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's like it really is. It boils down to, what are people most interested in? A lot of like the selling coral for the first time at a frag swap, that was up there. What can people relate to, or what do people want to do in their reef that you can help them through, or what is that tactic or whatever that you use for fragging zoanthids? I mean, zoanthids are in the spotlight right now. As there was a reefer that we lost 3 weeks ago now in Texas from palytoxin poisoning. There's a lot of questions around whether or not that was actually the cause, but I think a lot of people are really nervous about touching anything zoanthid or pallies because of that.
Yep.
Because they've heard of the horror stories. But you got to think about the millions of times these things have been touched and poked and cut, and there's one person that potentially died from that a couple weeks ago. So it doesn't happen very often, and I always preach in my videos, I wear protective eyewear and gloves, and just cover yourself. Like, don't take any risks. Those things sometimes when you're cutting them will eject water, and who knows if that has it in there or not. There's just not I wish there was more research done on that, and maybe I can dig and try and get to the bottom of that with some actual like marine researchers, because I think it'd be interesting to know, are there some that actually do carry that and some that don't? Do the smaller ones have as much of a risk as the larger ones? I feel like it's a big unknown in the hobby, and I think that would really I feel like people really get educated about that for
Yeah,
sure.
you know, I had Sanjay Yoshi on the show. I think it was last November, and he was telling a story. I don't know if it was the zoanthids or the paleys that were in his tank. Maybe they were in his tank, and he gave them to a friend who essentially these zoanthids on a rock ended up in the guy's backyard and
Mm.
outside, right, for a long time. And then they whoever had that rock was brought back in and put into a reef tank, and there was still toxins from those paleys on that rock. It's just amazing. I might be getting parts of this story wrong, but it just speaks to the I guess toxicity. I can't even say that word. How toxic those things potentially are.
Yeah.
You know. All right, so before we switch gears here, and we want to talk about your lair. That's another thing we have in common. We both have layers in our basements. But
Yes.
so Aaron Methvin is slash member checking in. Remy, did you get in contact with Kathy for guidance on the clown breeding?
Aaron is so Slash is our Reef Club here in St. Louis. And I did get in touch with Kathy, and she is actually, and Keith, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Kathy. She's given a couple talks at like Magna. She was the first breeder to successfully raise centrifuge as coral beauties in the lower 48.
Oh,
So that's her claim to fame. And she's right here in St. Louis. So it's been tricky, kind of like trying to coordinate schedules with her, but she is just a wealth of knowledge and kind of a prize to have right here in St. Louis. So I'm hoping to do a video with her down the road, but she's got all of these crazy hacks and how you can like culture rotifers out of like solo cups and making sieves out of plastic cups and bowls and things. She does everything on a budget, and it's really cool because that makes it accessible for almost anybody to culture Fido and rotifers and different kinds of live feeds. So
Great Bearded Reef is saying also this book by Joyce D. Wilkerson, Clownfishes, A Guide to Their Captive Care, Breeding, and Natural History. Another potential resource there.
yeah, let's check that out.
Uh, Going back to the paleys, Reef Girl Cindy is saying, I got sick from brushing dead paleys with a wire brush from a rock that had been sitting in the garage for a couple of months. Pretty unbelievable.
Yeah. Reef Girl, do you know what? Can you tell us what kind of paleys those were? Were they like the green ones or the purple ones? You know, the big fat heads on them, or were they smaller? I'm just curious because I feel like I think they're considered the proto palies. They're larger heads. They're not the grandest or the grandis. They're like in between a Zoa and a grandis. I'm just wondering if that's what they were because they grow fast and then you try and get rid of them or you move them or whatever, and that's when people start to have problems, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess, paleys seem to be more toxic than zoas, or does it depend on the zoanthid in terms of how toxic it can be? Do you have any idea?
That's the
Yeah.
No, that I think that's the big question. I mean, if someone is watching and they know the answer to that, I've been in the hobby for 6 or 7 years. I still don't know, and local fish stores don't know and can't tell you, and even forums, who knows? So I'd love to get to the bottom of that for sure.
Just a reminder, everybody, once again, to hit that like button. We're getting more and more people tuning in here, so if you haven't already, hit that like button. So, Remy, you did a video for us about the layer behind you there. So I'm gonna start running that video, and it's gonna probably take 20 to 25 seconds to catch up in terms of what you're gonna be seeing and everybody else is gonna be seeing on YouTube. So why don't you go ahead and kind of describe to everybody that doesn't already know what you got in your basement?
Yeah, so I have it really started off with my one frag tank that I moved from Chicago when we first moved back to St. Louis. I set it up in a hurry. It needs to be redone. The sump is a detritus trap. I need to start over on that tank at some point, but just everything's doing so well in it now that I kind of don't want to. So I've got a frag tank. I have a 25-gallon lagoon that is an innovative marine lagoon, all in one. And that's a great, like the dimensions are fantastic. I think it's like 22 long, 12 high, and maybe 20 or 22 deep. Just a really fun tank. I love the lagoon style tanks. I don't know why I like the shallow tanks more than, your deeper set tanks. But the lagoon had been going strong for a long time. I had to deal with dinos for a little bit. I had been dosing Vibrant, and that went wrong because I wasn't watching my nitrates and my phosphates, and I lost a couple things here and there, but was able to move some things out of the lagoon and into my frag tank. I think and then I have a Pico tank, which is a 2.5-gallon tank. That's just macro heavy. That is the home of my pom-pom crab, which is one of the coolest little creatures. And then there's also a peppermint shrimp in there, and the rest is macros. And then I have a Suspiciularia as the only coral in it. But that's been going pretty strong too for a while. And I think the claim to fame for me is probably the weeping willow leather, which just is probably the most captivating coral for being the pinkish, brownish, flesh colored, it's a leather, you know what I mean? But for whatever reason, it's just so mesmerizing, and watching the clownfish go in and out of those polyp stalks is just amazing. And then I also created a frag tank extension, which I built last year for the frag swap. So essentially what that does is allows me to separate all of the coral that I want to bring to the local frag swap in advance and put it in this frag tank extension that's plumbed into my frag tank. It's the same water, everything. And then the night of the frag swap, or, the frag swap prep, I can just, pull out each one of those racks and boom, we're off. We're off and running. So a lot of this is going to change over the next year, I would say. I really want to redesign it. I really want to make it look more clean. I don't know if you, can see my cardboard in the windows.
Oh, nice.
But I don't know if I could change it at this point. I mean, I feel like people have pointed it out, and it's kind of become part of the channel a little bit. But I really want to clean this up down here. My wife has kind of given me permission to no holds barred, just do whatever, that I can keep everything down here, and she doesn't have to worry about the kids running and getting into things. So wires off the floor, making sure that everything is clean, and having some new tanks. My goal is to take the countertop all the way around in a horseshoe pattern all the way around, so that I can just put tanks up there. Would like some just clownfish breeding tanks would be nice. And I would love a macro display that's 50, 60 gallons, something like that. I just want to play with some new tanks. There's definitely a change coming. I just don't know when that's going to be. So
It's always fun though to plan stuff with reef keeping. When I start thinking about a new tank, I don't know. I start thinking about it probably a year before it actually happens, and I'll get the tape measure out, and it's kind of fun to take some measurements and just kind of imagine a tank here or a tank there, and play around with the possibilities. For me, I know when I start doing that a new tank is coming, and I can't help it. It's gonna just overwhelm me, that curiosity in terms of wanting a new tank. So, but I don't know. I think I'm kind of maxed out here in my basement. The electricity bill just keeps getting higher and higher. So, you gotta kind of manage that sort of stuff. But it's a lot of fun. So
what is your electricity bill, just out of curiosity?
Well, let me put it this way. When I used to live in Connecticut, and I had a 225-gallon tank. I had 3 400-watt metal halides over that, and I had a frag tank with another 400-watt metal halide over that. And that's like half the stuff I got going on here in Vermont. But it was not uncommon in the summertime, and I ran a chiller because of the halides, to have a $900 utility bill. Yeah. So I just got to look at my latest utility bill here, and it was like $550, and it had been in the $250 or $300 or something like that before I added my second system. So Yeah, prices are starting to go up, I guess, in terms of the amount of juice that's coming into my house.
Yeah, so this house that we're in now, it's the first house I've ever been in that's all electric. There's no gas at all. So all like we have two units, one upstairs and one for the one main floor and downstairs and one for the upstairs as far as HVAC goes. And we had the upstairs one was 20 years old and it finally crapped out on us last summer. And so we had to get a new one, which is like not awesome as far as the wallet is concerned.
Yeah.
But we were in that $500 to $600 range for electric bill, and I was like, gosh, is this my tanks? And it turned out to be that this 20-year-old air conditioner was just
Oh
pumping,
man.
and our electric bill went down significantly with this new unit. It's like $200 cheaper a month. I'm like, oh, thank you.
I'm just noticing a couple of comments. Greg Carroll is they're still talking about the paleys and the zoanthids, and Greg is saying to this day does not have any zoas or paleys, and that's because he got poisoned a while ago at a frag swap. He didn't know about them being toxic. I have, like, in my 187 gallon display, I've got a bed of zoas, zoanthids, two different types that are just pretty much spread the about half of the bottom of the tank and then all along the rocks. And they're not bothering any of my corals like the SPS. So I have just started to frag them, and you guys are starting to really wig me out here in terms of frag. I've never fragged zoanthids before, and now I'm getting quite nervous about the fragging. So
we're all so used to wearing a mask and protective gear. Now you should be good to go.
I just, I have my glasses, and I think that's good enough. But now I think maybe gloves could be, in order. Oh, Great Bearded Reef, thanks for the super chat. The comment is, my understanding is that the paleys are more toxic, I guess, versus the zoas. At least this was always what was passed along through my club. That's my perception as well.
Paleys I feel like it's the Reef Girl said that earlier. It was the pretty prolific green. I think they call them green death pallies. They grow fast, and they're just the most of the time. Those are the ones that you see coming up where I'm gonna boil my rock in my kitchen to kill everything. You get those fumes, and it's just not good. There's a couple other people here that had recommended solar, and I think you and I need to get with Jim Telegram and have him hook us up with some solar.
Oh, is Jim a solar?
I know he's got a couple panels hooked up, and I think they're dedicated just to his reef system. I don't know if he's watching now, but he said he was going to. But yeah, I really want to pick his brain on that, because I feel like having a solar backup or just some help from the sun would be awesome.
Yeah, I had a company come out a couple of years ago to kind of give me an estimate, and we have a good roof to put panels on because it's south facing, and so but in terms of doing the math and saving money on the electricity bill, it just didn't make sense at that point in time. But yeah, I see Greg is saying that the solar deals right now are probably the best ever. So yeah, perhaps it's a good time to look back into that stuff, for sure. But yeah, so talk to us about the frag tank. And one of the things that I think I've had issues with over time, and I know other folks have had issues with in terms of a frag tank, is trying to keep it clean from problematic algae. Now with a frag tank, you've got frag racks on the bottom, so I've always tried to keep good flow in the frag tank. But when you've got some frag racks that are pretty close to the bottom of the tank, it can be hard to get some decent flow through there. You're not going to be able to get an NP10 or NP40 underneath the frag rack to crank one. I mean, the gyros are good. I've got a gyro under one of my set of racks in one of my frag tanks. So what do you do, Remy, in terms of trying to keep your frag tank algae free?
Man, I wish I had an awesome answer for you. Lately, over the past 2 months, I've had my sea hare friend who is just doing a fantastic job at keeping it down. I kind of have to supplement now with some algae from the refugium to kind of toss in the display tank, so he's good to go for a little bit. I will eventually take him back to the LFS, but yeah, it's an ongoing struggle. And you kind of hit the nail on the head with that algae is just so hard to get when it gets on the frag racks and the egg crate. It's just so difficult. Like I got to the point where, you know, once it started, I would just switch out a rack.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Remove the rack, put the frags onto a new rack, and clean that rack, and just kind of cycle through it that way. But yeah, I've never had major issues with algae in any like scaped tank, but for whatever reason, the frag tank has always been an ongoing battle. And I think a lot of it honestly has to do with the fact that when I did set this up, my refugium has, I don't know, probably 60 or 70 pounds of live rock from other tanks that I consolidated when we moved from Chicago. On top of that, it has a bunch of like, it's like a junkyard for zoanthids that are like pest zoanthids, like Nirvanas and Pandoras that have grown onto the rack that I don't have the heart to throw away. And I should probably like just suck it up and do it, but there's just like cut up little pieces of rack everywhere in my refugium as well, with like random zoas on it. So it gets pretty messy in the refugium, and I need to have a better cleaning process when it comes to that. But I feel like if you've got good biological filtration in the sump of your frag tank, then you know the algae should be at bay. But I think the best process for me is just kind of removing the racks and replacing them and cleaning them, that kind of thing. So
yeah, you know, a power washer is a really good thing to clean a frag rack. I think if you got a you know, you try to brush algae off of a frag rack, you're just fighting a losing battle. But I've found that you know, when I need to, you know, and over time, even if I don't have an issue in terms of algae, just over time you get stuff building up on those frag racks that even coralline algae can you know, kind of like make it difficult to keep frag plugs in a frag tank. So yeah, you know, and what I do is every week I will pull out the racks when I'm siphoning the detritus out of my tanks. So I'll pull the frag racks out for like 5 minutes, and you know, with the frags on them, and it's not gonna harm the frags because they're used to being out of the water. I just make sure the lights are off. So I will get in there and I will siphon the crap out of the detritus to remove it from those frag tanks. And you know, that seems to be pretty effective for me too, in terms of just trying to keep it detritus free, which can be tough.
Yeah, I think the goal, or the key to keeping any frag tank is to mitigate issues when they start. Like whether that be hair algae, or you've got a crazy piece of fast-growing whatever LPS or SPS that's taking over the frag rack, whatever that may be. Get to that before it gets too late, and you've got, you know, a good base of egg crate on your SPS colony, because that's what I've got right now. I've got this amazing piece of, I think it's called Apache Chief. I think it came from your side of the world, Justin Credible.
Okay.
From Credible Coral Labs. It was actually Jeremy's from the Reef News Network. Him and I did a trade, a long distance trade, and this thing is going nuts. And it's just, it loves that rack now. The rack and the frag are one.
That's a good problem to have.
It's never coming off. So
talk more about the weeping willow. That's essentially a long tentacled leather coral, right?
Yeah. So I think the start of that, and I don't know if, I think Jake talked about this with you when he was on, Jake from Reef Builders, but he really took, I took interest in this weeping willow whenever he did one of his initial videos on it. He showed the picture that they featured in one of the coral magazines, and I was like, man, that thing is just so beautiful, and it's a leather, so that means it's not difficult to keep, which is something for a novice reefer. I was like, let's go. Nowhere, like, just can't find them anywhere. And out of the blue, one day, one of our local fish stores posted this video, and it looked like a torch. Looked like a torch coral just blowing in the current of the tank. And I was like, is that it? Oh my gosh, that's something close at least. I'll take it. Like, how much do you want for it? I'll take it. And I got this mother colony for really cheap, under $100 for this thing, and it was big. And so I ended up doing a little bit more research on it. I actually contacted Jake and I was like, hey, can I use some video from your video to kind of compare the two together? And I was asking him a bunch of questions, and he's like, no, do your research and find out if this is actually the same thing or not. And I did a video on it, and it compared, out of the 5 traits that I came up with from his video, it compared with 4 of them. The only one that it didn't compare with was when the flow is turned off, the polyp stalks kind of like fold over the crown of the leather and make that like that weeping willow tree kind of look. And it just didn't do that. I don't know if it's the length of the polyp stalks. They all seem to compare pretty well. I have no idea if it's like the size of the crown that makes a difference. I don't know. But he's allowed me to call it a weeping willow for a little bit now, so I'm okay with that. But there's just so many out there now. You know, there's so many different kinds, and you see weeping willow, Japanese green weeping willows. You see, you know, there's just tons of long polyp leathers out there. And I always go back to, like, at the end of the day, get something that you like. You know what I mean? Get something that's going to add you're obviously going for movement if you're going for a long polyp leather coral, whatever that may be. So just get something that you like. And there's a lot of varieties now that I've been in this for a little bit and hunting for them. There's a lot of varieties of just long polyp that'll give you 3 to 5 inch stalks that aren't necessarily the weeping willow, but will still give you that same kind of look. I've got, like, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 different kinds of long polyp toadstools now. And there's some really cool ones. I've got this really, like, deep, like, forest green colored one, and I can't wait to see that thing grow out. It's a fascinating coral.
I'll tell you, the leather coral was like the first LPS coral that caught my eye. I was this guy had a local fish store in Stamford, Connecticut, and he was an SPS. You know, he was a nut and just was really good at it, but he had this really cool leather coral in his tank, and I was like, I'm digging that. All right, so I'm gonna get myself a leather, and I don't know if it was that particular first leather coral that I got, but it just grew big and it just got huge. And my Clownfish hosted the leather coral too. And then I remember there were these yellow bright yellow leather corals. I don't even know if they're still around in the hobby, but those were just striking in terms of that coloration. And now I guess they have like the ones that are kind of greenish yellow, almost fluorescent type. Really neat stuff.
Yeah. So I've got it's called a Japanese green weeping willow, but it's like fluorescent. It's like it's a pale green color with purple tips. I've got a deep water toadstool that has pretty small polyps, but it grows so slow. The guy that I bought it from said that he's fragged this coral maybe twice in 8 years. It just grows so slow because a lot of these are, you know, pretty deep in the water and just have a slower reproductivity, you know, rate. And it's just, I don't know, they're just cool. They're cool. They're easy to frag. You just take a razor to the crown if you want. And I've got is it Tyree, I think, or an ORA green, just regular toadstool that I first got in the hobby for $15, I think. Yeah. And that thing, it's like a dinner plate now. It's still in my frag tank. I haven't touched it. It's one of those things where I kind of don't want to now, but there's going to come a time when I'm going to have to, because it's just so big.
And you take a razor blade to a leather coral, right, in terms of fragging it? Is that what you do?
Yeah, you can do that, or you can do, if you've got really sharp scissors that are clean, you can do that. The thing about scissors, you just want to make sure that everything is sterilized. You want to be using new razors that don't have the oil on them. I always make sure that everything's super clean before I cut, because you're cutting flesh.
Do you so what do you dip the corals after you frag them?
Yeah, I usually have a bath and a couple drops of Lugol's, some iodine, which I guess lately I've been reading more and may or may not need. It may actually do more harm than good. not sure. I still do it. I haven't done enough research on my own, but I usually put a couple drops of Lugol's in for fresh cut
So
leathers.
we have a little sidebar going in the chat here about lighting. So maybe we should talk about lighting for a little bit here. Remy, I see Alex is talking up the metal halides, and I'm certainly a big metal halide fan. And but you know, in terms of your tanks, I assume that you're using LEDs.
Yeah, I've got mainly AI primes, radions, and I actually have over the frag tank extension. I think you can kind of see it here. It's a T5. It actually has a halide in it. It's a very small metal halide. It's one of these like these combo lights where it's
Oh yeah.
T5, LED, and metal
Yep.
halide. I never run the metal halide. I just run the T5s on that. But I do have some T5s, and again, would like to get more of a uniform kind of ecosystem in here. The one I have many gripes, but one of the gripes that I have about my system is that it's just so piecemeal. You know what I mean? There's just brands here, brands there, cords here, cords there. So I'd like to get some sort of cohesiveness when it comes to look on all the lighting and stuff like that. But I know nothing about metal halide, so this is all you guys.
Yeah, I Great Bearded Reef is touting T5s, which I use, you know, as supplemental lighting with metal halides, and I've seen some pretty sick tanks lit by just T5s only. So yeah, that's always made me wonder in terms of whether to go with T5s. But the thing I don't like about T5s is the bulb replacement, and but you know, with the halides that I have, I gotta like you know, fork over $80 per bulb every probably doing it every year now. Back in the day when you ran metal halides on a HQI ballast, it would overdrive the bulbs, and so that would shorten the life of the bulbs. So now there's these new, I guess the newer ballasts are these switchable ballasts, and I don't think they're really a true HQI ballast that would overdrive the light bulbs. And I like to use these 20K iridium, and I'm going really old school here in terms of this conversation, but I always found that using a 20K iridium bulb overdriven was just an awesome look. It was like a crisp white look over the tank, and that's what I'm doing right now with my tank, the 187 gallon tank and the frag system that's tapped into that. But I am going with LEDs for the new tank, so it's a whole new ball game for me and a whole new learning curve that yeah, I'm excited about. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think the white light look is kind of a refreshing look nowadays. I've got a buddy, and I'm not sure if he's watching now, Inland_Reef, Tyler. He's got an amazing macro tank that's actually lit by, yeah, and he's got a bunch of coral in it too, but it's lit by freshwater LEDs. So it's a very white light tank, and it's just kind of cool to see all the natural colors of things. Not that fluorescing corals aren't natural to some degree, but it's really kind of a cool wave, and I'm excited to see more tanks like that in the future, for sure.
So you're pretty much keeping LPS and I guess some softies in your tanks. Are you having plans to step it up a little bit to SPS at some point down the road?
Yeah, I've got several acros right
Okay.
now. Nothing in bulk. I have like a home wrecker frag. I have a couple Walt Disney
Oh, okay.
frags,
So
and
you're into it.
yeah, but they're green. You see all these like orange and purple and yellow
Yeah,
Disneys, and
Photoshop. You know, I mean that's
I've tried to juice up the primes as much as they'll go, but it's still not really popping. But recently got into, I'm just kind of looking over at the tank here. Anemones. My buddy Ben has been hoarding anemones for the last like couple months now. He's got a little thing going, Ben's Nems, and so I've got a Chicago Sunburst in my tank now, and a Black Widow, and so I'm kind of like I've never kept a bubble tip anemone in my tanks before, and they're fun. Like I have them in baskets, so
Yeah.
like I'm not
Yeah.
afraid of them like
Yeah.
venturing out, but like just watching them accept the chunks of food that I
Mm.
feed them is just like the
Yeah.
coolest thing. I don't know why I love feeding them Reef Frenzy from LRS, the chunky stuff. They really love that. I think it's really cool. Got a mix of things. I think if I'm light on anything, yeah, it's probably SPS, but the acros and millies that I do have are doing okay. I'm sure that if I were to focus on those more, that's another thing that I've learned over the years is just like if you try to keep Zoas and SPS and leathers and all those in the same tank, they're not necessarily going to thrive as much as they would if you were to just have an SPS tank
Yeah.
or just a Zoa tank, because the parameters that they like are a little bit different. So
Yeah, with SPS they like a lot of flow, and some of the LPS a lot of the softies are just not going to be able to handle that sort of thing, and yeah, it can be a tough kind of balancing act. What Tell us some more about your systems there, Remy, in terms of what you typically use in terms of calcium and alkalinity supplementation, to maintain your parameters there. What are you using at this point?
yeah, pretty basic stuff. I use the Fritz line of alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium, and I've got just a Wi-Fi doser on the frag tank. On the lagoon, not a whole lot of consumption when it comes to elements. I when I do a water change on that every other week or so, it's a 25-gallon tank, and with rock, I'll do a 15-gallon water change on that and really replace a lot of that water. So, but I do have I dose all for reef on that one, and it's like 0.2 milliliters a day or
Hmm.
something very small, just to kind of keep it stable. Yeah, but as far as that goes, it's really just it's pretty basic stuff. I'm not doing trace elements, and I'm not doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff with dosing yet. I can see that in the future for sure, but it's a pretty basic setup. I actually, my sump on the frag tank was built for Triton, the Triton method.
Oh yeah.
So the refugium is pretty huge. I'm not running the Triton method, but I think that refugium has really kind of been a blessing and a curse, because it can trap a lot of the stuff, but at the same time gives me a lot more room for biological filtration.
So yeah, that's essentially what you're using for nutrient export. What are your like parameters at in terms of nitrates and phosphates? What do you like to keep
I
them at?
Yeah, so in the beginning of the hobby, I was like, you want 0 and 0, right? You don't want anything.
Hmm.
You just ultra low nutrient systems. That's what's in. That's what you're doing right now. So I have transitioned to, I like to keep phosphates between 0.02 and 0.06 ish, and I like to keep my nitrates between 5 and 10 ppm. I think having some in there is good, but once you start to get over in that 15 to 20 range, and yeah, it's just a slippery slope once you get that deep into it. I don't test nitrates a whole lot. Usually, when I'm seeing some things go wrong in the tank, I'll start testing nitrates and phosphates. Phosphates are a little sneakier, but I think that they're easier to control. I don't know if you've ever used lanthanum chloride or any of those. It's just a couple drops of that will go a long way. So I've used that before, but I haven't really had any issues as far as alk swings or calcium swings or any of that goes lately. And now that I'm saying that, I'm just gonna go ahead and knock on wood here, because don't listen to me,
Yeah.
okay? All right.
So Alex is asking you, do you add any amino acids or trace elements? I don't think I think you answered the trace element question, but have you ever used aminos to feed your corals?
Yeah, I use I'll usually do a dose of the bright well aminos a week. I don't really go heavy on that. But yeah, I have found a little bit of benefit in that. Corals look good whenever I'm dosing aminos. So yeah, I do that every once in a while.
Do you dig into like ICP testing if you have any issues with the tank, or do you kind of like rely on basic test kits?
I've done one ICP test, and it had me going nuts. Just like Like, do I need more bromium in my
Yeah.
tank? Do I need
Yeah.
strontium in my tank? Do I need, like, how do I, it's so, because I don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, you may know more about this, but I don't know if ICP testing was built for the reefing hobbyist. So you get this readout at the end of it, and you're like looking at all these numbers and wondering what you should adjust. But do you really need to adjust any of these things? I think when I did it, I was doing it for a video, which never actually got out there because I don't know, it was really boring. Uh, I was trying to kind of calibrate what my like HANA checkers were saying and what my testing at home was saying and what a professional, company was saying, or, a readout of whatever testing they do there. So I've done it once, but I really think if you want to seek out a decent representation of what your tank is doing, I really feel like you got to do it at least once a month. And that's pricey. But if you really want to get some good data, I feel like you need to do it way more often than like once or twice a year, because that one time you could have mismeasured, you could have put more in than you needed to. Like, there's just so many variables that can go on. And the fact that you have to send it to Germany, at least with my kit, it was ATI, it went to Germany. I know that there's North American companies now that do that,
Yeah.
but how much can change in that water sample in the 2 weeks that it's gone? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of like things in there that I'm not 100% sure on. So
Yeah, I don't do a lot of ICP testing, maybe like 4 tests a year, and I think I always like to do a test when everything is going really well and my tank is looking good, because that's kind of like a baseline for me. So all the data is essentially, if there are certain things that are out of whack and need to be tweaked, I'm not a tweaker. I don't like to tweak. I just use the ICP testing for things that might be big red flags. So I don't like to tinker a lot in that regard. But yeah, I'll do a test when things are great, and then I'll do a test when things are not so great, and hopefully I can kind of see something between those two tests, and maybe a light bulb goes off to help address it. All right, so Brock B is talking about the Reef Moonshiner in terms of, I guess, the coral feeding, and yeah, Andre's work, top-notch stuff, and getting better in terms of the proper doses. Alex is commenting about the ICP testing. The main problem is that the chemistry can change in that vial by the time it reaches the machine. Yeah, I don't have any experience with that, but maybe Alex has had some experience with that. So Remy, another thing I noticed with your tank in terms of the frag tank is that, and this is common with frag tanks, is that they're bare bottom, right? But your lagoon has got sand in it. What's the difference in terms of keeping those two types of system, one with sand and one without sand? What do you like and dislike about bare bottom, and dislike or like about the sand?
Yeah, I think initially sand looks awesome. I like the look of sand in a reef tank. I prefer it from a visual standpoint. I've kind of adopted, and I'm not sure where I picked this up, but I adopted a method of vacuuming half of the sand, one water change, and then the other half for the next water change. So I don't do the entire sand bed. I have a really shallow sand bed, so I don't necessarily see a huge issue with like, things getting caught inside bacteria, all that kind of stuff. Like if it was a deeper sand bed, probably wouldn't want to disturb it as much, but it's literally probably, I don't know, maybe a quarter of an inch.
Yeah.
I just have it there to kind of cover up the glass on the bottom. As far as having the bare bottom for the frag tank, Coraline just will take over eventually, and will cover it anyway. So, and it's a frag tank, so it is bound to be neglected at some point, and you are bound to not keep up with that. So, it makes it super easy to clean as far as like getting all the loose fragments off of the bottom, all the detritus off the bottom. That's what I like most about the bare bottom. And then I've got all the rock and the refugium, so it's still getting that biological filtration as well. Don't have to have a lot of rock in the actual display, which is nice.
You battled dinos. Was that in the lagoon tank, or was that? Yeah.
Yes.
How did you end up beating the dinos?
So I didn't do I really didn't want to do a blackout. I don't know why that like worries me so much, but I didn't want to do a blackout. I just feel like 3 days or 4 days of black tank is unnatural in so many ways. And I know fish don't need light or whatever, but I anthropomorphize animals, and I blame Disney for that. I don't want to turn out the lights on my fish and my coral, so I tried to get around it in other ways. One method I used was actually getting a UV filter. That took a little bit of time. The other one was doing water changes, but siphoning into a sock and reusing that water again, if that makes sense. So I wasn't
Yep.
actually doing a fresh water change. I didn't want to give it less nutrients, if that makes sense. So that was a method. Innovative Marine makes a drop-in UV filter. I don't know how effective it is, really being at, I think it's like 9 watts or something like that, but it's made for that tank. So I was like, why not give it a try?
Yeah.
And after I added that UV filter, it was just a matter of time. I also tried the method of turning up the tank temperature to 82.6 or something.
And
There was a
how'd that
video.
work out?
It was I didn't see any negative effects on the coral or the fish, and I don't know. I think that this is what happens a lot of times with dinos is you start trying 4 or 5 different things, and whatever combination of those that works for you is kind of what you settle on. So those are the things that I tried. I don't know if they all worked in conjunction with each other or how that all happened, but I kept the UV filter and it's still running and the tank looks fine. So I think it's a good thing to have on the tank. I'd kind of like one on the frag tank, but I think everything's going to change here in a little bit. So
So it's tough in terms of the dinos or the problematic algae in terms of trying to keep that stuff out of the tank. Bryopsis. I mean, when I had the conversation with Julian Sprung, he's like every tank has bryopsis, and I've heard every tank has dinos. So it just seems like when the conditions are right, that problematic algae will be popping up and kind of show itself. But the other thing in terms of this hobby is trying to prevent pests. Hitchhikers that are coming in from corals and what have you. So I'm assuming you bring in a good amount of corals because you go to frag swaps, or perhaps you don't bring in a ton of corals and you just grow stuff out yourself and frag it. But what do you do in terms of trying to prevent pests coming in on corals? What's your routine there?
I think the best thing to do with any kind of pest is just having your utility fish or cleanup crew that are going to do the job for you to an extent. And sometimes that'll get out of hand. I remember the first time I had flatworms, I didn't have a wrasse in the tank and it got pretty crazy. And I think the combination of manual removal with airline tubing and getting a 6-line wrasse for me, I never saw them again. Like you said, a lot of tanks are going to have those pests, but can you just mitigate it so they don't become a big nuisance? And you're also helping out the fish who's feeding on the pest, who's, whatever that may be, a damsel feeding on flatworms or wrasse. And as far as like aptasia and stuff go, it used to like really freak me out when I would see an aptasia. I remember buying a piece of live rock from the local fish store when I first got started, and just to jumpstart the tank a little bit on the cycle. And I saw an aptasia on that live rock, and I was like, this local fish store sold me an aptasia on a rock, and I was so upset about it. And then I realized, like years later, that like a spore could be on your
Yeah.
frag plug, and it would develop into an aptasia or whatever. So my way to mitigate those is I have a good peppermint shrimp cleanup crew in the display in the refugium so that I can control the population down there too. And just having those utility players in all of your tanks, I think is key. And for algae, having a good tank crew or a lawnmower blenny or something like that picks on that stuff all day, it's going to help you. This sea hare has been a workhorse. Like, it's just, I've never seen anything destroy algae like a sea hare. and he's just been great. So I think employing some of those natural feeders of those pests is always a good thing. I know that flatworm exit was an option at one point, and I just didn't want to do it. I not that I don't like putting chemicals in. I don't think anybody really likes to put chemicals in their tank to mitigate anything. But the more natural approach is kind of how I always choose to look first to see if there's a way, and then maybe go that way if it gets too bad.
Yeah, listen, I think natural means is always the best option versus using something like chemicals in a tank. And yeah, I mean, I've had great luck with turbo snails in terms of some algae control. There's some algae that they're not going to touch, but yeah, you're right in terms of tangs. I always like to have a good group of tangs in my tanks before I even have a problem. Just because if you don't have the tangs in there and you start developing algae issues, then they're probably not going to touch the longer, stringy type of algae. They're more of like grazers, so they're definitely good workhorses in terms of having in a tank to prevent that stuff from getting out of control for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess we're getting kind of close to the end here, folks. But any other questions for Remy? Put them in the chat. I see some stuff about Rock B using seriously considering using the live rock. Yeah, I am digging the live rock I got from KP Aquatics. I think it's great stuff, but it's the downside is that it's a lot easier for hitchhikers to come on in with the live rock versus the dry rock. But I've started, my one attempt with a dry rock tank. I got Aptasia in that tank. I started 100% dry rock, and the Aptasia came in on a coral somehow. So it's the odds are certainly going to be less if you're using dry rock versus live rock. But yeah, I would have to say that biodiversity in the live rock that I got for the new tank was just incredible, and it did have a lot of critters on it, some good and some not so good. But if you if you dip the rock a few times in a high specific gravity solution of salt water, that will flush a lot of the undesirables out. And I even had a mantis shrimp that popped out, which was a little scary to me. I did not want to get close to that freaking mantis shrimp. I didn't kill it. I kind of gathered up all the red-eyed crabs and the mantis shrimp that came out that flushed out, and I took them to my local fish store. I was like, here's a present for you. Put it in a tank without any corals.
Yeah, the KP Aquatics stuff is interesting. We had Tyler, my buddy, and Tyga Boy H2O on Instagram did a podcast on the Reef News Network and talked all about macroalgae. And the KP Aquatics rock that they mariculture there is like, it's the coolest thing. And like you said, that you can get some bad hitchhikers on there, but the biodiversity on that, it's almost like you're adding an ecosystem just with that rock on a new tank. And from a macroalgae perspective, you can really get some cool, unique macros that will hitchhike as well.
Yeah.
And if you desire that, if you've got a display macroalgae tank, then that's a cool thing. But if you're, wanting coral mainly, it could be kind of a nuisance down the road for sure. But I like the idea, and I haven't tried that yet. I would imagine that, I would suggest that if you're a more experienced reefer and have seen flatworms, you've seen, the crabs, the undesirable crabs, and those kinds of things that you know how to deal with, go that route. But if you're kind of new, maybe stick to the dry rock and go that way as well.
Any fuzzy crab that has red eyes is a bad crab. That's all I'm gonna say. The ones with the fuzzy legs and the red eyes, get rid of them. Don't kill them. Just give them a new home and what have you. I see a question here from Augustin Ramirez. What can help me with my diatoms? Any experience, Remy, with diatoms?
I feel like those just go away, right? Over time. That's a new tank thing.
That's more of a new tank thing. I think diatoms also will pop up if you have a lot of silicates in your system. So, I think my experience is if you use the RODI water, then, that should potentially solve that problem. So if you are not using RODI water, Augustine, then I would suggest doing that. But if you don't have a lot of corals in the tank right now, then a 3-day blackout could kind of nip it in the bud if you want to try that. But yeah, I'm kind of like you, Remy, in terms of doing blackouts. I don't like to do it with corals. It scares the crap out of me.
Especially SPS. I feel like you can unwrap that present and not like all that bleached coral. I don't know. I've seen that happen in people's tanks around here, so I know that that's a thing sometimes. So RTN sets in.
Yeah, for sure. So, dude, anything else you wanted to chat about? What's in the future in terms of the new potential tanks or tank? Maybe I don't want to say tanks. Is it one big tank you're thinking about?
It'll definitely be tanks. I really would like a couple 40, 50, 60, somewhere in that range, but I really want a proper 150, 200 gallon
Nice,
display.
nice.
I'm kind of on I'm on the fence because I'm not sure what dimensions I want to go with it yet. I love the dimensions on your new tank. I think that that's a good way to go. I really would like to do a lagoon style, but I'm just not sure yet. I want to get with like a tank manufacturer and see if they've got any crazy ideas or something like that. But I really want to make this space down here more visually appealing, cleaner. I don't know. I get like a Scandinavian look in my head, like IKEA but better quality kind of thing, and just a cleaner look and wrangle these cords and everything. I feel like this is the product of a rushed job in a lot of ways. So and it'll be fun to take everybody through that too.
Yeah.
You know, the metamorphosis of what this could become or will become. So
Yeah, cool.
but that's in the future for sure.
Cool. Well, listen, I'm going to be certainly following along your journey, and yeah, it's always fun to kind of like plan stuff and do a new tank build, and I'll be keeping my eyes open. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. Everybody who showed up to watch, I appreciate your time as well. I know that it's what is it, Thursday night? Tomorrow's Friday, so that's awesome. But Thursday night, you may have better things to do, you may not. I don't know. But thank you so much for showing up, and thank you, Keith, for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Remy, for sure, man. Definitely will love to have you back, and yeah, everybody, thanks for tuning in. So that's going to do it for the show tonight. I just definitely want to give my sincere thanks to Remy for taking the time to be the guest on the live stream tonight. My next live stream will not be next Thursday. It's going to be next Tuesday night at 7 p.m. And that's because my guest Thursdays are not good for my next guest, who is Chris Meckley from ACI Aquaculture. And looking forward to having Chris on the show next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it should be another great show. Anyway, until then, everybody be safe, be well, and we will see you next time. Adios.